event. But thank you all for being here and for supporting Ensure Equality. My name is Alyssa Stampf. I'm CEO and co-founder of Ensure Equality, and I am delighted to introduce Amy Johnston with Urban Wellness, who's going to take us through a few things here today. And then at the very end, we'll give time for you to talk with Amy, figure out how to engage with her. But feel free to engage in the chat, come off mute, and Amy has done a phenomenal job with the slideshow and indicated where you can do that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Amy, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here with y'all today. Let's see. So I would love for this to be a pretty informal conversation really between us today. So that means you're not off the hook as far as participating. But I think we all get so much more out of these when we're creating kind of a community space together. So I'll definitely invite you throughout the conversation to engage. You can use the chat, you can come off mute and ask questions, whatever feels more comfortable for you. But we are today going to talk about first the impact of caregiver and compassion fatigue. Like, what is it and what does it do to us? And then we're going to think about rest and how to start incorporating some restorative practices into our very, very busy lives. A little bit about me.
Nice. Have a good time.
I'm a licensed clinical social worker in Chicago. I'm the clinical director at Urban Wellness, which is a therapy practice here. And I run our workplace well-being program. So we work with lots of organizations on things like, managing burnout and helping to train leaders and managers around how to talk about mental health and well-being in the workplace. So we are going to go on a little bit of a road trip today. We're going to start with a check-in. We're going to think about who are the caregivers, right? Whether we are caregivers ourselves and you're here because I'm like, yeah, it's me. Hi, I'm the problem. Or whether you supervise caregivers or you've got caregivers in your life or you're just interested in helping, the people that you care about. We're going to look at stressors and the stress response, and those are two different things. And then we're going to move into the rest portion, and we're really going to think about what do we believe about rest? What kind of rest are we engaging in or not? And then what are some restorative practices that we can start weaving into our lives? Because we know that the stressors in our lives are probably not going anywhere anytime soon, right? I'm very realistic about this, right? We are not going to say, well, you just have to do less and relax. Not realistic. We're all busy. If you're a caregiver, you're really busy. And we still want to build some capacity in ourselves to take care of ourselves, even when things are hard. So we're going to have a quick check-in. I'd love to hear from you all in the chat. How full is your fuel tank right now? And you'll see this little green chat icon there. Anytime you see that on a slide, that's an indication that I'm going to ask you to engage in some conversation, right? So it gives you a little heads up and a little hint. But let's see. Oh, we only have 7 people on right now. Okay, you can unmute too if you'd like to share out loud. But I'd love to know from you, are you feeling like full tank, ready to go, full speed ahead? Are you feeling like, oh, I'm 3/4, I'm feeling okay? Are we half full? Are we getting a little bit low and starting to slow down? Or are we like riding on fumes, should have filled up 15 miles ago and I'm hoping I can make it? Right. I think it's really important for us to know where we're all starting from at the beginning of these conversations. We've got running on empty, half full, half full. I think I'm probably pretty close to like 1/4 or low. We've got pretty close to 0, vacillating between running on empty and 1/4 tank. Okay. So a lot of us are in that like pretty low space today, this morning. Well, this afternoon, I guess. We're in afternoon now. And that's not surprising, right? Especially given that we may all be caregivers on top of whatever our full-time work is. So just this week, my son had strep, my daughter was sick, everybody was home from school at the beginning of the week, and I still had to manage, work and responsibilities and all those things. So yeah, it's really a tough time of year, especially to be trying to balance all these things. My hope is at the end of this hour, we feel our tank maybe moving a little bit more towards that halfway or above halfway mark, and that we feel a little bit restored by the end of the hour. And I think we can't really have this conversation today on December 13th without recognizing that we're also in a season, right? Like this concept of caregiver fatigue and rest is really important any time of year, but this season specifically has a lot of both and I just like this idea of like holding both things at once. And so the holiday season's bringing grief and gratitude for a lot of us, right? The holidays can bring up a lot of emotions and feelings. We can have fear and faith hand in hand. We're trying to juggle at the same time as we're trying to be joyful. And I think for me, especially in the last few years, those are concepts I've really been trying to integrate more into how I think about things. We're not good or bad. We're not struggling or thriving. A lot of the time it's a juggle of both, right? We're trying to hold it both at the same time. So I think just giving yourself that permission and that grace that we are trying to do a lot of things at once and they can be, you know, beautiful and difficult at the same time. And I think that especially applies to caregiving. So when we think about caregivers, there are so many different ways to be a caregiver, right? If you look at this picture, anyone in that photo could potentially be considered a caregiver, depending on the dynamics of the situation. Even the little guy there, because he might be caring for a pet, or he might be a kind of a parentified kid who cares emotionally for a parent. There's lots of different ways to be in that caregiving space. But you know, people can be young or old, they might be unwell themselves, they might be willing or unwilling, right? We might be a caregiver, but aren't really happy about it. We could be really capable or really struggling. We could have loads of support or we could feel very isolated, right? There's lots of different ways that we can exist in the world as a caregiver. And so just thinking about yourself and maybe which of those feels applicable to you. And I think a lot of times just acknowledging our experience of being caregivers can be really helpful in moving through whatever emotions we're having, right? If we've kind of been in denial about the fact that like, I'm not actually a very willing caregiver. I have to take care of my mom because she's elderly and I'm an only child. I'm not really loving it. It's not something I really wanted to do. That can be challenging. Caregivers can also be caregivers in lots of different ways. So we might not even think of ourselves as a caregiver, and we might be one. So if you have elderly parents or other elderly people in your life, you may be a caregiver. You might be part-time or full-time. You might be just caring for your own kids. You could be caring for other people's kids. You could have a partner that becomes disabled or a sibling that either, you know, was born with a disability or becomes disabled. It might be a short-term temporary thing where someone's recovering from an injury or an illness, right? It could be someone who's going to be ill for a really long time. It could be caring from a distance. So I've got a lot of clients that I work with who have elderly parents or siblings with needs that don't live near them. So they're not providing day in and day out physical care, but they're managing their finances or they're managing their insurance or they're managing other pieces of the puzzle. The mental load still falls on them. So just to have that kind of broad definition for ourselves of what does it look like to be a caregiver. If anybody has questions or comments, please feel free to pop them in the chat anytime. So caregivers can be especially at risk of kind of exacerbated compassion fatigue or that like caregiver burnout. And that's for lots of reasons. But some of those are, if you are a caregiver, chances are you've got a lot of empathy, right? You also may be a caregiver as part of your profession. So, you know, I'm a therapist, I'm a mental health caregiver. I worked in a children's hospital for 6 years, nurses, physicians, respiratory therapists, all caregivers, right? You know, if you work in an insurance area that looks at healthcare or health needs, like there's a lot of caregiving within those industries. So our empathy is usually something that we think of as a real value and a real benefit, like I'm an empathetic person. But empathy can also really take a toll on you if you're empathetic without boundaries. We'll talk about that in a little bit. We also have insufficient recovery time, and we're going to talk about this chronic stress cycle, but when our stressors are coming at us thick and fast and one after the other, we don't have a lot of time to give ourselves that space to restore, right? So we're just going from one issue or crisis or need to the next. And sometimes it's a need at home and then a need at work and then another need at work and then another need at home. And it can feel like we're pouring from an empty cup a lot of the time. As caregivers, we might have our own unresolved personal traumas, right? We've all experienced difficulties in our lives, our childhoods, our families, and not all of us have had the opportunity to really process that and think about how it's impacting us. And so when we become parents or we become caregivers, the generational trauma that we maybe haven't really dug into can start to get passed on. Often when we're caregiving for vulnerable people. So children, elderly, disabled folks, sick people, pets, you know, people and beings that need help and support and are vulnerable by their nature. And so when we're taking care of vulnerable people, that takes a toll on us. And then caregiving can be incredibly isolating, right? So many times when I'm working with caregivers in therapy, they're feeling very alone, very isolated, even in a room full of people, because they feel like no one really understands what it's like to be living my life. And it can be physically isolating because if you have a young child or you're caring for someone with dementia, like sometimes you can't actually leave them and you can feel even tethered to the space you're in. And then lack of resources. We just never have enough of anything to go around when it comes to, support for caregiving, financial support, connection in our communities, places to like fill our cups, right? So lots of reasons that as caregivers, we might struggle. And specifically, when we're thinking about stressors of caregiving, stressors are the external things that come at us, right? It's not stress, it's stressors. So specific issues that either come at us externally or kind of the negative internal dialogue that we might be having with ourselves. So there might be some role confusion, right? Like if you were a spouse to a healthy partner and they become disabled and you become their caregiver, that can be really challenging for your relationship dynamic. If you are a child whose parent becomes ill, that can be really challenging, right? Especially if your parent used to be someone that was like very responsible on top of things and took care of you. When that role shifts, it can be a really messy dynamic for everyone. We also have unrealistic expectations, right? We may, with our kind of internalized perfectionism that so much of us have, we may have an expectation that we can do a lot more than we can actually do, or that we can make changes in a system that we can't actually change. Or there may be expectations coming at us from others, right? That like you can spend more time or more money or more energy than you have to give. Caregiving can come with a huge lack of control. One thing I've learned as a parent is I'm in control of like almost nothing, right? I have no idea when my kids are going to get sick, when the school's going to call me to come pick them up, who's going to be having an emotional crisis on any given day. The amount of control we have to give up when we become caregivers is massive. But it's also things like, how much money things are going to cost or how much support is available or what resources we have. And then that unreasonable demands from ourselves and others. Like, what are we, how high of a bar are we setting for ourselves? And is it realistic that we can meet that? So lots of stressors coming at us just as caregivers, right? Not considering all the other stressors that we're also dealing with, kind of overarching in our worlds. And then I stuck this one in because we're in the holiday season, but there's the stressors of the season. And I just love anxiety and festive anxiety because I feel like everything's more festive if you put a string of lights on it. But on top of all the caregiving stressors, this time of year comes with a lot, right? So we've got relationships, and this might be like coming to family events with people that you haven't seen in a long time. That want to catch up on everything going on in your life. It could be, people that you maybe don't have the best values or political match with, and those kind of things can be really igniting and hostile around the holidays. You've got prying relatives and people that are, wanting to know things that you might not really want to share. We've got traditions and that sense of like, we should do this, we have to do this, we always do this. And like I mentioned before, that perfectionism, right? That inner critic telling us that we have to do it all right. One thing I think in recent years, as we're sort of coming out the other side of what pandemic life looks like, is this Your obsession sometimes with like getting back to normal. We have to do things the old way, and the old way might not work for us anymore. So I think we're also struggling with making new traditions or figuring out new ways of doing things as opposed to like zipping it back up. Doing it all in lack of boundaries, I think, is an overarching caregiver challenge that so many of us face. And we're going to specifically talk more about boundaries. And then people pleasing kind of just dives right into that too, of wanting people to be happy with you, not wanting to upset people, not wanting to rock the boat. But all of that comes at a cost to ourselves. So you've seen the chat box, you've hopefully been brewing some ideas, but I want to hear from you all, and feel free to unmute and share or put in the chat. How are the expectations of others or your own expectations of yourself stressing you out this season, right? What are those expectations? Where's it coming from? What's coming up for you right now in these weeks leading up to the end of the year that's really bringing up your stress response? See the chat. Got so much fear of letting someone down versus having the time to rest. Yes, people pleasing definitely showing up, right? If we have more on our plates than we can do, it's really hard to make that decision between rest and being productive, right? And part of that is the kind of the social norms that we're living in. What else? What else is coming up for people when it comes to expectations and stressors this time of year? Got a quiet group this morning. Okay. We'll let you get away with it for now. Oh, great. We got a few more answers here. Let's see. Lisa says, balancing my needs against others' feelings and trying not to straight people please, right? That's hard. While you're trying to do that, it can feel stressful, figuring out what do I need, how do other people feel, and how do I navigate the space between that. I got canceled all my holiday travel because I'm moving in January and dealing with disappointed family. So that's another example of like setting a boundary, and people can struggle with that sometimes. Yeah, but ultimately we do have to think about what do I need versus what do other people want, right? And sometimes that's a good way to think about it. Like, what do I need? And we have to fill that need. And then we can think about what I want or what other people want. Yeah, thank you for sharing those. And feel free to keep adding to the chat as I go on. So I want to talk a little bit about the stress cycle, because stressors are the things coming at us. The stress cycle is what's happening internally in our brains and bodies. So a stressor approaches us, our alarm bells go off, we fight, flight, or freeze, we feel depleted, and then we recover. So that's the cycle working as it should for a regular old threat that pops up. So if you're driving down the street on your way to work, maybe with your neighbor who works in the same building as you, and a dog runs out in front of your car, lots of things happen in your body at one time, right? So the dog is the stressor, your alarm bells go off, and that means your respiratory rate starts to speed up, your heart rate speeds up, your muscles tense, you slam on the brakes, your brain narrows to focus on exactly the task at hand, which is stopping the car. You might fling your arm out in front of your passenger because we still think that like our arms might be more productive than our seatbelts. The dog runs off the road and you go, whew, oh my gosh, okay, are you okay? Did you see that? Everybody's okay? Okay, good. You take a deep breath. You kind of process it with the person next to you, or you might like call your mom and be like, oh my gosh, I nearly hit this dog, but everyone's okay. Your heart rate comes back down. Your cortisol and your adrenaline, which are your stress hormones that spiked during the moment, they come right back down again. Whew, you recover. And that's a successful completion of your stress response, right? You did all the things, you move on with your morning. The problem with caregiving and with the stressful world we live in and our busy lives and jobs is that we go right from depletion to stressor, right? We're missing that recovery spot. So instead of those stress hormones peaking and coming back down again and living at a baseline, we're living with a chronically heightened stress response all the time. So, you know, you guys could maybe add to the chat if you So yes, let's add to the chat instead of out loud. What are some of the top stressors coming at you right now between caregiving and work, right? Could be deadlines, could be wrapping things up at the end of the year, could be childcare challenges. What are those stressors that are popping at us fast and furious right now? Mine this week has been sick kids, but so many meetings and parties. Yes, just feeling like nonstop expectations to show up for things. I was supposed to go to like a girls' night ornament exchange tonight, and I had to say no. And I know my friends will be disappointed, but I was like, I just need to go to bed early tonight. And I got a few like, what? But you said you were coming and everyone's coming. I was like, no, I'm not gonna, I think I'm gonna have to say no. What other stressors are popping up for folks right now? I'll let you think on that. So if you're thinking about like what types of stressors might be popping for caregivers at the moment, so, between meetings and parties and let's say for me, sick kids, the stressors are coming, my alarm bells are going off, I'm feeling anxious about how I'm going to handle all the things and see clients and also take care of my kids and figure out childcare. I'm feeling depleted. And just when I want to like take a rest and lay down, then my phone rings and, one of my therapists here has hit her head and has a concussion and has to go off work for 2 weeks. And now we have to reschedule her clients, right? So things are just constantly going without that space for recovery. We've got training my replacement at work, part-time people before I get laid off in January. Wow, that is very stressful, right? Knowing that you're training someone to take over your job that you're potentially not like interested in leaving. Huge stressor. And that takes you into that stress cycle too, right? Of like, I'm training, I'm stressed about my job being gone, I'm stressed about having to teach people things. There's no time to recover because the next thing comes right back up again. So the problem right now for a lot of us is we're stuck in that chronic cycle, and that can lead really quickly to caregiver burnout and fatigue. So we're going to think about the ways that burnout and compassion fatigue impact us, but some broad categories I want you to think about are exhaustion, physical, emotional, just being just so depleted, our attitude, like how we feel towards others, how we connect with people in relationships or don't. A sense of guilt of maybe when we do take time for ourselves that we're disappointing other people or, the hard aspects and dynamics of saying no. And then anxiety, worry, stress, and depression, feeling sad, feeling flat, feeling low energy. So we're going to dig into some of those a little bit more. I really want to talk to you about this concept of the window of tolerance, because as a caregiver, my clients and myself, we've found this to be a really helpful framework to think about how we're doing. We all have a window, and when we're inside that window, we can handle things, right? So that's optimal arousal, social engagement. We can connect, we can problem solve, we can recover from things. When we're inside of our window, we can handle hard things. When we're up here above our window of tolerance, we're hyper aroused. We're in fight or flight. We are running or fighting. We're anxious. We're angry. We're activated. We're feeling all the feelings. When we're below our window, we're in hypoarousal, and that's when we're doing nothing. That's when we feel flat, low, sad, unmotivated, can't get out of bed, can't get projects done, feeling stuck. Right? So ideally, when we have a nice big window, we can handle most things. Okay, so when we have a big window, it means we're resourcing ourselves. Our resources help expand our window. We're getting enough sleep, we're getting some exercise, we're socializing, we're doing something creative or something that feeds us. We have a manageable amount of demand versus resources to handle it. The bigger our window is, the more we can handle. When we're feeling stressed, when we're feeling anxious, when we've got more on our plate than we can handle, when we're overwhelmed, our window starts to squeeze shut, and the amount of things we can handle in that kind of optimal way gets really small. So an example of that when it comes to caregiving is you'll see on the big window, you've got ups and downs throughout your day, right? So let's say you wake up in the morning and you've realized your alarm didn't go off and your partner left the house without waking you up, even though they knew you had to be up for work. So you're a little down because you're like, "Oh, I can't believe that my partner didn't like take the time to wake me up before work. He knew I needed to be up today, but like, okay, I'm sure he was busy too. Not his fault. Like, we'll move on for the day." And then you get up and you get into the kitchen and you make some coffee and you're pouring your coffee and you get distracted because your cat jumps up onto the counter and you spill your coffee everywhere. And you're like, oh my gosh, my coffee everywhere. Okay. Ooh, okay. Grab a towel, clean it up. We'll be okay. And then you get to work and you find out that a deal you were working on fell through and it's like a lot of wasted time and money. And you're a little disappointed, but you're like, you know what? This deal probably wasn't the best fit for us anyways. And your day goes on like that, right? Ups and downs throughout your day. But because your window is nice and big, you can handle them. You might be upset or sad or irritated, but you can kind of talk yourself or breathe yourself into a space where like, I can cope, I can handle. Now, the other picture, you have a tiny little window because everything in life feels hard, right? Like your mom is ill and she's been hospitalized and you're trying to sort out what's going on for her, and your kids are having a hard time with friends, and your partner got laid off and financially things are rough right now and holidays are coming up. So your window is real tiny. So now those same exact instances happen throughout your day and they are completely outside of your ability to cope. So now you get up in the morning, your alarm didn't go off, your partner didn't wake you, and you are in tears because you're like, my partner just must not care about me at all. I can't believe they would leave the house without waking me up. They knew I had to be at work today. Like, our relationship is failing. And then you spill your coffee and you're screaming at your cat for distracting you because now coffee is everywhere. And you start wiping up the coffee and you toss your coffee cup in the sink and it shatters. And you get to work and you find out your deal fell through and you're beside yourself, right? You lock yourself in the bathroom and have a good cry because you just don't know what to do. And so the same exact events throughout the day cause a completely different reaction, right? Maybe I think we can do hand raising. Show of hands, if you can raise your hand on your little icons, of who can relate to this. That like the same event when you're feeling well is going to cause a completely different response from that same event when your window is super tiny, right? Yeah, I see hands going up. So I think we don't often think of it that way, that like it's not the event itself that's causing us to struggle, it's whether or not we have the capacity to handle it. Some mornings, I can be very patient while my kids take 15 minutes to get their shoes, coats, and backpacks on. Some mornings I lose my mind and I am roaring at them to get out of the house. And it's not their fault. They're not doing anything different, right? It's my capacity to cope. So what we're trying to do when we think about building rest and restoration, part of it is expanding our capacity to cope, right? The bigger our capacity is, the more we can handle. And it's not like a blame the victim situation of like, well, you just need to handle more, because we know that there are times when there's more to handle than anyone should have to handle. But it's an awareness of, if I'm not giving myself the things I need to open my window and cope with stressors, there's no chance that I'm going to be able to stay cool, calm, and collected. Right. And sometimes things happen that deserve a giant response, even with a big window. I mean, if things are really outrageous, you're going to have an outrageous response, and that's okay. But just being aware for yourself, like, ooh, my window's pretty small right now, because something that I could usually handle is putting me in a place where maybe I can't. So we can think about it of like lights on a dashboard, right? When your car is not doing so well, the dashboard lights start to flash, and then you panic and you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I have to get my car fixed. But it's really clear because your dashboard's flashing and something's wrong. Like, it's a clear signal that we need to take some action. And so these are some trauma responses or compassion fatigue responses from a great book called Trauma Stewardship. And it's what's lighting up on my dashboard. What are the clues or the kind of symptoms or signals that I am in a place where my window is pretty small and I'm experiencing that compassion fatigue, that caregiver burnout. So we've got a chat box here. So as I read through these and talk through them a little bit, I want you to think about, which ones of these kind of resonate for you, which ones maybe you didn't think about as a stress response before. Sometimes we're like, oh, that's just how I am, but actually it can be a stress response. And we're going to share those in a few minutes. So feeling helpless and hopeless, when we're really struggling, we can feel like no matter what I do, what's the point, right? I can't make a difference. I can't change this. I don't have any power in my situation. We can also feel like no matter what I do, it's not enough. Like it's a drop in the bucket in an endless amount of need. This can happen as a caregiver. It also happens at work a lot too, right? These are transferable. These aren't just caregiving symptoms. These are symptoms of just being overwhelmed with the amount of demand placed on us. We can be hypervigilant. So I am hypervigilant in the sense of hurry up and have fun, hurry up and get this done. We have to have a plan. We have to, know what we're doing. Like even on my vacations, my poor family, like I have an agenda, like the fun police is here. Because I don't want to miss anything and I want them to have a great time. But that's actually hypervigilance showing up. It can also really show up, especially for, oh, we've got someone who's hypervigilance. Yeah, please feel free. As I go through these, you guys share in the chat which ones come up for you or what you're feeling. But it can come up as hypervigilance, perfectionism in the way that I kind of explained, but also for people of color, for people in the LGBTQ population, for people in any kind of marginalized identity group, hypervigilance can come up as intense fear and understandable worry about safety in a situation, right? So it can be, I'm so overwhelmed with everything going on and everywhere I turn feels unsafe, right? Emotionally unsafe, physically unsafe. There's lots of ways that hypervigilance can show up. That's not just like, oh, this is in my head. These are real experiences that we're having. Diminished creativity. So this doesn't just mean like I used to paint and now I don't, although that is true for me. But it can also be diminished creativity in that we have a hard time like coming up with creative ideas or creative solutions or kind of thinking outside the box or being more flexible, right? It can also be very like rigid and black and white thinking. Although if you used to do art or you used to play music or you used to love to like try new recipes and or DIY things and you find yourself not doing that, that can be a symptom, right? That we're in that compassion fatigue space. Minimizing the concerns of others. So this for me really showed up when I worked at Lurie Children's Hospital, which is, for those of you not in Chicago, it's our main hospital here for kids. I worked in the intensive care unit. Kids were chronically and critically ill and often not surviving. And so I worked in a really intense traumatic space. And then when I would go home to my husband, he'd say something like, oh, I had such a bad day at work. He's a plumber. Like I had 5 calls. I didn't get to take lunch. And I couldn't empathize with that, right? I couldn't hear his concerns because they paled so much in comparison to what I was experiencing. So when you're in that space of being really depleted, really empty when it comes to what you have to give to others, we can't even hear other people's concerns because we break open, right? We can't absorb anymore. Sometimes it just comes in chronic exhaustion or physical symptoms. Lots of times I'll have clients coming into my office with migraines, back pain, GI symptoms, and they go to their doctor wanting an answer of like, do I have, an ulcer or a GI condition? And often the doctors are like, no, you're dealing with chronic stress. And that is the problem here. Which is like the most unsatisfying answer you can get from a doctor. Like you want a physical ailment with an answer to that problem. But oftentimes our physical stress or our emotional stress is creating physical problems. Part of the reason for that is stress causes increases in our cortisol and our adrenaline in our brains and bodies. And when those hormones are coursing through your body, it just wreaks havoc. It increases your blood pressure. It increases your respiratory rate over time. It decreases your immune function and causes lots of damage. It can cause ulcers, right? Because of the way those hormones work in our bodies. And when we're living in that elevated fight, flight, freeze response all the time, our bodies physically in a cellular level don't have an opportunity to recover. So if you've got any sort of chronic physical ailments and you're thinking it's just getting old or, this is just a medical issue I have, you might want to think about where this could be coming from a compassion fatigue space. Dissociative moments maybe sounds like a scary term, but I think most of us have experienced this. So you might be driving home and all of a sudden you're in your driveway and you kind of zoned out and didn't realize how you got there. Or you're in a meeting and you just missed the last 4 minutes of what someone said, right? So we dissociate sometimes when we feel overwhelmed or when our brains can't take on any more information. I think my kids dissociate when I do yell at them about things. They're like, nope, I'm not going to be here. I'm just going to take myself somewhere else. Sense of persecution. So as a caregiver, we can kind of feel that martyrdom sense of like, everyone's against me, like everything's going terribly wrong. I have no power or control over the situation. And just really feeling like people are at you or trying to kind of get in your way. We can feel guilt, right? If you feel overwhelming sense of guilt, especially if you are taking a break or doing some rest, we really have to look at, am I feeling overwhelmed as a caregiver? Anger, cynicism, irritability. Oftentimes depression comes out as anger and irritability, especially for men, but I think more and more so for women. We do an entire session on exploring anger, especially with women's groups in the workplace, because women tend not to express their anger or feel like they can express their anger in the same way. I think it's a really interesting concept, but if you're noticing yourself being more irritable or angry, it's something to pay attention to. And for me, I know when I was burned out at the hospital, I was coming home very irritable with my kids and my husband, and my window was just really tiny. Numbing out can mean a lot of different things. It can be the endless doom scrolling on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. It can be, mindlessly watching Netflix on repeat. It can be numbing with substances, which can lead into that addiction space. There's lots of ways that we numb, and we're going to talk about numbing versus nourishing. Grandiosity is my personal favorite. I often find myself feeling like if I don't do it, no one else will, right? And some of you that might be true, because if you are the only person in your office or the head of a project, it might feel like if I don't fix this problem, it won't get done. But oftentimes it's like, well, if you don't fix this problem, but you create relationships and space for other people to engage with you, maybe it can. We often feel like it's just easier for us to do it ourselves than to ask other people. And then deliberate avoidance, like if you're in an office space, like taking the long way to the bathroom so you don't have to chat to a certain colleague, or leaving your mailbox full, or ignoring emails or leaving things unread. And when you're noticing yourself doing that, it's probably a red flashing light that you're overwhelmed. So I know that we've got some folks in the chat that like all of them to different degrees, never doing enough, disassociating, hypervigilance. So I think it's just helpful to have a look at these and give yourself a little bit of an internal check-in to see what tends to come up for you. Okay, moving into rest. We are a little bit behind on time, but I'll try to speed us up a little bit. I like this quote from Brené Brown that it takes courage to say yes to rest and play in a culture where exhaustion is seen as a status symbol. So it used to be that people would say, how are you? And we would say, fine. And now people say, how are you? And we say, so busy, crazy busy, exhausted, so tired, right? Those are sort of like our standard responses now. And we say them with kind of a badge of honor, like, oh my gosh, I'm just so busy. I'm so busy. Because that's what we've been conditioned to, right? If we're not exhausted, we're not doing enough, or we're not working hard enough, or we're not enough. So I think it's important to start thinking about that dynamic when we consider what is it like to think about rest. So I want to hear from you all. How do you describe your relationship to rest and what gets in the way? I'd love actually to hear from some folks, if anybody feels comfortable unmuting, to share a little bit about maybe your beliefs about rest, your relationship with rest, or what keeps you from rest. And I don't mean sleep necessarily, but rest.
I'll start us off, Amy, because I struggle with this big time. I watched my mom, who was a homemaker. She, I'm the oldest of 5. She would run around all the time. She never sat down.
Mhm.
And so watching that and then seeing myself, I have a hard time doing the same thing. Rest to me feels like I'm not being productive enough. I'm not doing enough. And so when I sit, I feel guilty.
100%. Right. It's that generational story that we've been told. It's that, like, whether you're actually white or Protestant, we're all in this sort of like white Protestant work ethic culture that's been kind of created around us. And that sense of guilt is a huge barrier to rest. Yeah. Anybody else have an idea of what gets in the way of rest for you?
I think some of it is what kind of activities, it's way too easy for me to just like zone out on my phone or in front of the TV versus something that is actually going to be restorative.
Mhm.
Um, and I think the other thing that I've been thinking about lately is that rest has to be a very physical thing, but I can analyze my way out of why I shouldn't do that. I can give myself all of these really reasonable reasons as to why I should do something else or not choose myself first or, any of those things. And it's so easy to talk myself into that.
Yep, we can absolutely argue ourselves out of rest in an instant. Yep, 100%. And that scrolling or just numbing out versus actually doing something restorative is something almost everyone struggles with. Anybody else have a rest belief or barrier? Okay. But I love what Elisa said at the beginning around like watching your mom run around like that and that sense of like, if I'm not productive, I'm not good enough. I'm not sure if anyone's read Untamed, Glennon Doyle's book, but she talks about that in her book that like she comes home from work one day and she sees her wife Abby just like resting on the couch and she's furious. She's like, who just rests? Who just like lays on the couch resting in the middle of the day? Like there's work to be done. And Abby is like, I'm tired. I want to rest. I'm just taking care of myself. And Glennon's mind is blown by this, right? And so she's doing some introspection about that and realizes like the story that she grew up with is that you only rest when everything else is done at prescribed resting times, when resting is appropriate, and it's not something that should just be kind of an integral part of our lives. And just because that's a belief that you've been fed, it doesn't mean it's a belief we have to keep. So anytime we have a belief about something, especially when it comes to self-care and looking after ourselves, we can decide, like, is this a belief I want to keep or a belief I want to shift? And it doesn't happen overnight, but it is something that we can decide to change. And so she was working on that, right? Saying like, maybe I can rest, even if it feels uncomfortable. I'm going to try it because I want to shift my belief around rest. And that's not something I want to pass on to my kids. So, extra newsflash, rest is not a reward. If you take anything away from the conversation today, I would like that to be it. Rest is not something that we do to reward ourselves for hard work. Rest is not something that should only be done when your to-do list is complete because our to-do list is never complete. Rest asserts our basic humanity as people, and just like we need food and shelter, and we need to go to the bathroom, and we might need medication for something, like rest is an essential part of being a productive, full, well-rounded human in our world, right? And so when we spend too much time trying to be productive and not enough time resting, it pulls us away from our humanness, right? We're not machines, we're not meant to be. So if we can start to shift our mindset away from rest as a reward for being great and start thinking of it as an integral part of what we need to live and grow and be healthy, just like food, just like sleep, because rest and sleep are different, it's essential. We cannot have rest in our lives if we have no boundaries. So I'm not going to read through everything on this slide for you, but I think for caregivers especially, boundaries are so incredibly important. It's not about telling other people what they can do or what they can't do. It's about telling them what you will or won't accept in your life, right? And there's lots of different ways to have boundaries. So it can be around our thoughts, our ideas, how we converse and engage with each other. It can be about how much time and energy I have, right? That I'm deciding I'm not going out with my friends tonight, even though it would be fun, because my energy is just not there. I need to spend my energy in a different way today. how much money we can spend on things, especially coming into the holidays, right? Maybe this year I can't afford to buy gifts for everyone in my extended family. I might only be able to do like a grab bag for one person, or I might say this year I'm not going to buy gifts. You don't have to buy any for me. Like, we're just going to take a break. We can have boundaries around our space, how much we're willing to touch or be close to people. And then we can have our boundaries around our emotional capacity, right? I'm an oldest daughter and I'm a therapist, so I tend to be the person everyone in the family comes to with all their stuff. And I used to kind of revel in that. Like, everybody needs my help and support. The grandiosity would kick in. And I've been working a lot now on saying, like, actually, I can't hold that for you. I'd love to refer you to a therapist if that's something you want to work through in therapy, but I can't be that person for you. So you really need to be able to identify your boundaries. Like, what is it that you need to say no to? What matters most? So a really great kind of soundbite you can take with you is, if you say yes to this, what are you saying no to? Right? If I say yes to going out tonight with my friends, I'm saying no to sleep. I'm saying no to like maybe getting some laundry folded and feeling like my house is in order. I'm saying no to like snuggling up with my kids tonight, probably saying no to like a nutritious dinner. So there's always a trade-off. Saying yes to something is a no somewhere else. It
Hey,
takes,
Amy.
yeah.
Sorry for interrupting. This is such phenomenal content, especially around boundaries, because I know that I'm going to ask for me, but all my friends here too, because I know as women and femmes, we're often socialized to not have them or to drop them very easily. For people that are new in their boundary setting journey, this time of year is probably difficult. Do you have any tips or tricks if somebody is working on setting boundaries for themselves or noticing when their boundaries are being crossed?
Mm-hmm. So often we don't realize that our boundaries are crossed until it happens. And we might notice it in lots of different ways. It could be a physical reaction of like feeling sick or uncomfortable or clenchy or angry, right? Like, we might feel hot, or our fists might clench, or your jaw could be tight. So I think paying attention to your body is really important, in addition to what's going on in your head. But sometimes we feel things in our bodies that we can't quite conceptualize cognitively yet. So paying attention to noticing if your boundary is being crossed. And it's always okay to go back and make a change, right? Just because you haven't set a boundary before doesn't mean you can't go back and set one now. So some people feel like, well, I've never told them before that, talking about their, I don't know, right-wing conservative political beliefs at Christmas upsets me. So like, I feel like I can't do that now. Yeah, yes, we can. We can, absolutely. We can say, I've never said this before, but I'm actually really uncomfortable when you say that, or when we have this conversation, or when you use that word. And I would really appreciate it if you wouldn't say that in front of me. Leah, I see you love this slide. Yes, I will make sure that Elisa has these slides, and she'll figure out a way to get you guys the copies afterwards. Because I think it is such a helpful slide. So I think we can backtrack sometimes. Sometimes we have to say, I've never said this before, but now I'm going to, and I'm going to assert this. And people might not like that. And so that is part of this, is like, when you first start setting boundaries, being strong in yourself, knowing that when I set a boundary, someone might not love it at first. It changes the dynamics, it shifts things up. People might be a little bit like irritated or confused. And if it's a relationship that's important to you and important to them, it is something that you have to navigate. I think also, as women and femmes, like you said, we're socialized to not set boundaries, or like just go with the flow. So even naming what you're doing can be helpful. Sometimes if I'm trying to set boundaries with my family around like their emotional needs and my emotional labor, I'll say, hey, I know that normally I would listen to all this and like be the person that does this for you. I'm really trying something new right now. I'm trying to have some better boundaries for myself, because I've noticed it really depletes me to be this person. And I'm trying to give myself some space from this. And sometimes that helps people understand it a little better if you take ownership of it. Like, I'm trying this new thing where I notice what's okay for me and what's not, and I say it. And sometimes people might be like, oh, but sometimes people are like, oh, okay. right? That's actually modeling really good boundary setting, because often if we don't have good boundaries, the people around us might not either. So sometimes saying it out loud is like, oh yeah, actually, okay, I could try to do that. But you will still have the people that don't like it when you set a boundary or are irritated or upset with you. And that is working on that people pleasing aspect of, we don't have to make people happy all the time. People don't have to like us all the time. You know, we need to figure out how to be true to ourselves and our values and accept that sometimes people are not happy with that. And that ultimately a good like internal question for yourself is, so what? Right. And I mean that in a very respectful way, not like it doesn't matter. But if my sister is upset with me because I set a boundary and she's irritated, what's the worst case scenario in that really? She'll be irritated with me for a few days and then she'll call me, and when she wants to go get a mani-pedi, and like we'll resume our relationship. And now she'll know I have a boundary. Or, you know, my grandparents who are Trump supporters and I am not, uh, might be irritated with me if I call out something that they say that I don't agree with politically, and they might be mad, and then they won't talk politics with me anymore, or they might not talk to me for another couple of days, and that's fine because we need a cooling off period. So kind of worst case scenarioing a situation can sometimes be helpful. Like the actual consequence of setting this boundary is just someone else having a feeling, and that's for them to manage. But it is a practice, absolutely a practice. And then when I say engage empathy, I really mean, you know, as we're trying to set boundaries, so are other people. Like lots of us are trying to figure this out at the same time. So trying to be in a space with each other where we realize, you know, we're all, especially at the holidays, like navigating emotions, navigating complex situations. We're doing the best with what we have. But sometimes our best doesn't look that great. And sometimes their best doesn't look that great. So giving people some grace. I hope that's helpful, but we could talk about this all day. Like I could do hours on this. Arrest audit. Okay. I really like this. And that was, you know, a lot of you have said knowing what activity to do, or like sleep versus numbing or other things. So this is like a little wheel of the 7 types of rest. There's lots of different like research models around rest, but this one can be helpful if you think of it in pie pieces of creative, physical, spiritual, emotional, mental, social, and sensory. I like to think of these as a buffet of options. Not everybody needs all of these full speed all the time. Some might really feel nourishing and supportive and restorative to you, and some less important, depending on how our brains and bodies are made up. But when you think about these categories, and we're going to go through some examples of them, give yourself some time to think what fills you up. Which of these really help you to feel restored, grounded, present, taken care of? Which ones do you feel more depleted in, right? And if you feel depleted in it, I think, oh, sorry, I moved his head too fast. If you feel depleted in it, noticing like, is that because it's just not that important to me and that's fine? Or is it something I really crave and I haven't been giving myself? So there's a difference between like, I don't do a lot of physical exercise, but that feels okay for me. The little bit of physical exercise I do is enough, versus somebody who's like, I love running, running fuels me, running feeds me, and I haven't been doing it. Those are 2 different ways to look at it. Numbing versus nourishing, for sure. Which activities do we do that numbs us out, that takes us out of our brains and bodies and just like kind of gets us in that avoidance place, versus what activities are restful, restorative, fueling, present? And so if we can even think about when we're doing our kind of internal rest audit, if we can swap out one numbing activity for one nourishing activity and see what the difference is, right? If I know that once I start scrolling Instagram, it's going to take 45 minutes of my time and I'm going to feel really bad about that afterwards, as soon as I open Instagram to start scrolling, can I substitute that with go for a walk around the block first, right? Or put on a playlist of Spotify and have a little dance party in the kitchen with my kids first. If I still want to scroll after that, fine. But just giving a little bit of a swap to start inching yourself more towards nourishing versus numbing. And always starting small. Like we don't want to put more things on anyone's plate. That is not the objective. We are all so busy. But what are some small ways that we can start weaving these rest practices into what we're already doing, right? So if you work from home, like a great strategy is get up and walk around your block to commute yourself into work before you start work for the day. And when you're finished, walk around your block to commute yourself home again, right? It gives you that little bit of physical exercise. It only takes 5 minutes. It changes your headspace from work to home, right? We're going to go through a few other like small practices. But I think it's important to notice which ones of these do we go, I actually really miss that, right? Like I used to paint 2 hours a week. It was a really great practice for me. I really enjoyed it. I haven't done it in years. And so when I think about being creative, it's depleted for me and I really, really miss it. So I'm wondering from you guys, I didn't put a chat box on here, but are there some like categories in here that you're like, yep, that one is so important to me and I'm really like feeling it a lot. I'm engaging in it, or which categories are like, oh, I really need this in my life. Any thoughts on which of these categories are resonating for you? Missing creativity. Yeah, I think creativity can be sometimes the first to go when we get busy because creativity takes some time and it takes some mental presence. What else? What else feels maybe like it's missing for us right now? You can think about it while we move on, because you might, on our next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about what rest looks like in each of those categories. So ways to engage in these different types of rest, right? There's lots of ways. These are just a few little examples, but I tried to do some small and easy access ones. So those might feel kind of like common sense, but the problem is we don't actually do them, right? We're not intentional about weaving them into our days. So all of these things you can do in 5 to 20 minutes. And based on my iPhone telling me how much screen time I spend a week, I know that I actually have 5 to 20 minutes a day that I could do some of these things. So we can be creative in lots of different ways, and it can be sort of like arts in the traditional sense, but it can be trying new recipes, DIY, it can be appreciating beauty, right? Even if you're not a creator, listening to music or looking at art or, being engaged in a creative space, going to a museum, all of those things can help with creativity. Physical rest can be sleep. It can be just being still and just breathing. It can be gentle movement, like going for a nice walk or, doing some stretching. It can be restful to go to a yoga class if it's not like a hot yoga, power yoga. Getting a massage can be super restful and restorative in a physical way. Spiritual, I think people sometimes get stuck on because if you're not religious, it can be hard to think about how to be spiritual and how to engage in spiritual rest. But any type of meditation, breath work, for me, being out in nature is really my kind of spiritual connection, like going for a walk in the woods or being by the water. Alyssa, thank you for coming. This is recorded, so you can watch the rest of it after we finish up today. Emotional boundaries and giving yourself a break from being connected to people emotionally can actually be a really nice way of emotional rest. Or talking with a friend that just really gets you, right? Someone who there's not a lot of labor involved. Again, journaling, nature, self-care, lots of ways. Mental rest is something we don't often think about, but a digital detox is a great way to engage in mental rest. Put your phone away in a drawer on silent for 20 minutes. Just take a 20-minute break from checking, right? Because we check and we check and we check all day long. Single tasking is actually a great way to engage in emotional or mental rest because we think we're great multitaskers. And in fact, multitasking takes time, energy, like a lot out of us. So if you can single task, even for a small amount of time, set a timer for 15 minutes and single task, it gives you some mental rest. And then social rest, giving yourself some time on your own. And what are the types of things that you could do alone that would feel restorative? Sensory rest can be as simple as closing your eyes for a few minutes, just giving yourself some time where you're not on a screen or engaged in hyper awareness of what's around you. Turning off the TV, not having the background noise, right? Spending time where you lower your senses. And then permission to rest, which is what we kind of started this conversation out about. So giving yourself some very concrete permission to do some of these things, right? You can fill your rest permission slip with whatever you want, but writing it down, saying it out loud, I give myself permission to do one of these things, and sign it and hold yourself accountable. And when you write it down, it helps to kind of seal it in you a little bit. And I know folks are dropping off, so I'll just finish this off for the video now so you guys can keep up these practices. We really need to commit to ourselves. So being able to schedule it in your calendar, right? If you work in a place that it feels safe to do so, I block out time on a Monday morning to say yoga class, or block out time on a Friday afternoon because I'm, going to have lunch with a friend. Being intentional about how we choose our practices and how to weave them in. Taking micro breaks. So, not working 8 hours straight without going to the bathroom, right? Like setting time through your day to take a few deep breaths, walk outside for, a 30-second breath of fresh air, have a coffee with a friend, text with someone who's really funny. Like, these are tiny but intentional micro moments of rest. We talked about setting boundaries, disconnecting, turning off your notifications, giving yourself some time away from the email. I have some colleagues here at the office who don't put their email on their phone as a way to help them disconnect. And experiment. Not all of these rest practices are great for everyone, right? Not all of them are going to fill you up or engage you. And some people might find meditation really boring. And some people hate yoga. And some people don't like to be outside. It's too cold or it's too hot, right? So we try things and we practice them and we see what gives us that feeling of being filled up. And then we engage in that. And then finally, making it a habit. Once you find something that works for you, you have to keep it going, right? And one way to do that is to tell someone about it. Tell someone, I now go to yoga on Wednesday nights. And so now they're going to check in with you and be like, oh, how was yoga last night? Did you have a good class? What was that like? And the more you can build habit, the easier it is to fit these into your life. And I think we will not have time to do our meditation today, but I would love to just offer this out to you all as you're watching, that when you're thinking about all the caregiving we do for other people, it's really easy to have these wishes for those around us, the people we care about, the people that surround us. But when you kind of put your hands over your own heart and turn it inward, it's a really powerful practice. So giving yourself that permission, may I be happy, may I be safe, may I have peace, and may I feel loved. And when we do that, it really helps to seal all that energy that we put out to everyone else, kind of seal it in for ourselves. And that leads us to the end. So thank you so much for coming, for watching. For those of you out in a virtual world watching this later, if you have any questions or want to get in touch with me, that's how you do it.
Amazing. And they can get in touch with Urban Wellness as well. I know something that Amy, you and I talked about before we started was, while you can only do therapy services in Illinois, you can offer services countrywide to conduct these trainings, these educational resources. Can you talk a little bit about that? I want to make sure folks know that this isn't just a one-time thing, that you're here with IE doing it. This is something that you do.
Yeah. So if anyone watching is in need of actual therapy services for mental health support and you're in Illinois, Urban Wellness offers in-person sessions around the Chicago area and telehealth for anyone in Illinois. We've great therapists with lots of specialties. So you can email me if you're interested and need a referral, or just look on our website, urbanwellnesscounseling.com. But yeah, for the educational pieces, we do trainings, workshops, leadership development, consulting for organizations all over the country, in Canada, large and small. And it can be anything from a one-off workshop like this one to series of trainings, relationships with consulting support, retreats. We love doing retreats, especially for leadership teams or new managers or new employees. So those are virtual or in person. I travel for those as needed. So we'd love to work with really any organization that's kind of getting on board with this idea that we have to take care of our people in lots of different ways, and their mental health and well-being is essential for organizations to be successful.
I love that. It is essential. And so much of this content was resonant and beautiful. And the thing that I'm going to take away is that you gave us such small things that we could do. And I think so often, especially this time of year, the grandiosity comes in. We're like, well, we got to do the big thing and we've got to do the whole way, or it's not good enough. And so thank you for giving us the permission to rest, creating the space with us, and showing us the little steps forward we can take. Folks, that was Amy Johnston with Ermin Wellness. Thank you so much for showing up, for being a part of our community. And I hope you have a very happy holiday season.
Thanks. You guys too. Take care of yourselves and let me know if there's anything I can do to help.
Amazing.
Rest up.